Yeah, I hope it's the cord, not the system. This morning we come to Ruth chapter 4, the final chapter in this story of Ruth in the Bible. And you know, it's kind of fascinating because the whole book is about Ruth, and yet she barely is even mentioned in the final chapter. And she's actually just kind of mentioned. She doesn't actually do anything or say anything in this final chapter, and one might begin to wonder, well, how can that be? How can the main character actually not even show up at the end? And what we're going to find out is, as we wrap up the final chapter, we're going to see that sometimes taking center stage is not the plan. You don't have to be the center of your own story. As a matter of fact, sometimes you have to step aside and let others take the lead, even in your own life. And so we're going to kind of see how that plays out and learn a little bit about why that plays out in Ruth's life here. In Ruth chapter 4, beginning in verse 1, it says, "Now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the close relative of whom Boaz spoke was passing by. So he said, 'Turn aside, friend, sit down here.' And he turned aside and sat down. He took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, 'Sit down here.' So they sat down. Then he said to the closest relative, 'Naomi, who has come back from the land of Moab, has to sell the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. So I thought to inform you, saying, buy it before those who are sitting here and before the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am after you.' And he said, 'I will redeem it.' Then Boaz said, 'On the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of the deceased, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance.' The closest relative said, 'I cannot redeem it for myself, because I would jeopardize my own inheritance.' 'Redeem it for yourself. You may have my right of redemption, for I cannot redeem it.' Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning the redemption and the exchange of land to confirm any matter. A man removed his sandal and gave it to another, and this was the manner of attestation in Israel. So the closest relative said to Boaz, 'Buy it for yourself.' And he removed his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, 'You are witnesses today that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Moreover, I have acquired Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance, so that the name of the deceased will not be cut off from his brothers or from the court of his birthplace. You are witnesses today.' All the people who were in the court and the elders said, 'We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built the house of Israel, and may you achieve wealth in Ephrathah and become famous in Bethlehem. Moreover, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through the offspring which the Lord will give you by this young woman.' So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her. And the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Then the women said to Naomi, 'Blessed is the Lord, who has not left you without a redeemer today, and may his name become famous in Israel. May he also be to you a restorer of life and a sustainer of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him.' Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. The neighbor women gave him a name, saying, 'A son has been born to Naomi.' So they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generations of Perez. To Perez was born Hezron, and to Hezron was born Ram, and to Ram Amminadab, and to Amminadab was born Nahshon, and to Nahshon Salmon, and to Salmon was born Boaz, and to Boaz Obed, and to Obed was born Jesse, and to Jesse David." it's kind of an interesting way to close the story. Now, I like stories of all kinds. True, fiction, doesn't really matter. They're all interesting as long as you know what's true and what's fiction. I really enjoy it. And that's probably why I enjoy theater. That's why I like doing plays and whatnot is you get to tell a story. That's really what acting is all about, is telling a story, and I like telling stories. I'm not as good at it as my dad. My dad can walk into any room, start talking to anybody, and you'll learn a lot. I mean, a lot. And you might not learn a whole lot of like really personal information about it, but you're going to learn a lot about something. You're going to learn a lot about his life, because he will tell you a lot of stories, and it's great. So I kind of think that's where acting comes from for me, is this telling of stories, and it's fun for me, and it's so fun for me that it doesn't really matter what role I get in a play. I'm not one of those that feels I need the lead role. I always kind of hope for it. It's kind of fun, and in the last play we did, I got the lead role, and it's kind of fun, because I mean the whole story seems to be around a lot of what you're doing, or in this case what I was saying in this last play, because a lot of what I said got a lot of people in trouble because I was a guy that just couldn't control. I just said what I thought, and then didn't realize what the consequences would be, and it's kind of a fun story, because how true is that? But one of the things about being in theater that you realize is, in order to tell a story, whether it's a true account that you're trying to relay, or whether it's a fictional story that you're trying to portray, you need every character, no matter how large of a role or how small of a role. Every character has to play their part. Every character is important to the development of the story. And so as we're reading this true account of Ruth, this account that was recorded, that is included in our Bible, and Ruth is the central character throughout the whole thing. We get to this final chapter, and she's barely even mentioned. And as we talked about last week, it starts to make sense when you realize that one of the characteristics that Ruth had, that I believe is why God selected her to play this great part that she played, which was she became essentially the grandmother of Jesse, who was the father of King David. And see, she's a foreigner. She's a Moabitess. She's from Moab, which they were really enemies of the Israelites. As a matter of fact, God said, don't let the Moab people come into your midst. Now, we could spend a whole lot of time as to, well, then why was Ruth allowed in? And suffice it to say, God wasn't really talking about their ethnic background. He was talking about the way those people were. He was speaking of the evil and depravity that they had shown. And don't let them come and taint you. Ruth had already converted. She had changed. And so she came in, and by becoming part of the lineage of King David, she also became part of the lineage of Jesus Christ himself. But as we learned last week, part of why God chose her was because she was humble. She was humble. And being a humble person, she learned the great lesson of learning to trust other people when she needed to allow others to play the part that they're supposed to play in this grand scheme of history. And so as we see that Ruth learned to trust Boaz, and as a matter of fact, that's what this chapter reveals about her, that's what we're going to talk about, is the trust she had to have in order to allow Boaz to do all of this for her. We also learn that we need to learn how to truly trust others. And ultimately, this means especially learn to trust Jesus Christ. Trust is an important component of following God. If we're going to be godly people, we have to learn how to trust. And so as we look at this chapter and we see what Boaz was going about, we're going to keep our focus on this trust that Ruth had to have as she's sitting at home. So envision yourself, however you envision the little house that her and Naomi were sharing. I rather suspect it was kind of a mud box with maybe a couple of wood chairs, maybe a wood bench, something to sit on. Maybe not, I don't know. But I envision a wooden bench of some kind. When I was a kid, I used to envision Naomi actually in a rocking chair, sitting in the version of the living room. Sitting there and just kind of rocking away and just kind of, because she's getting a little older now, and then Ruth is just kind of there. I mean, maybe she was pacing the floor. That's what I'd be doing, because she at the end of chapter 3, Naomi told her, just wait, let Boaz handle this. And so that's what she has to do. So first of all, she has to trust that others know what to do. In her case, she had to trust that Boaz knew what to do. Because there's this concern that she and Naomi have, and that is, okay, well, the harvest is going to wind down. What are we going to do to support ourselves after this? And so they came up with this plan in chapter 3 of, well, Ruth should tell Boaz, I'm willing to marry you. And in their culture, that would be a great idea, because then he would then be responsible for taking care of all their needs, because when Naomi would then become part of the close family, and it would be his responsibility to ensure that they're taken care of. So what a wonderful idea. What a wonderful idea. Well, some things had to take place, as we learned in chapter 3. There was another relative who was actually closer to Naomi than he was, who, according to the law, he had to redeem her property, all of her husband's things, and that meant inheriting the family obligation of taking care of the ladies as well. And so Boaz is like, I like this plan, but first of all, we got to deal with the fact that there's somebody else involved. And so there's a complication in the plan that I'm not sure that Ruth probably didn't have any clue about, and she might not even really understand all of this, how this redeeming stuff works. She might be a little like, well, what do you mean there's a kinsman redeemer? What is that? And what does that even mean? And what do you mean you got to redeem the land, and you got to redeem me, and raise up heirs for the dead guys? What does all that mean? So she has a lot of questions. And essentially she's told, just sit back and let Boaz handle it, because he understands all this. Well, she has to trust he actually understands this. She has to trust that he knows what he's doing. And remarkably, she's willing to. Because remarkably, she stays at the house with Naomi and lets Boaz go off and take care of this. Sometimes, even when we're worried, even when we're concerned, and I'm sure that there was some concern that Ruth had here, even when we're worried, we need to trust that others really honestly know what they're doing, that they understand what needs to be done. Joseph and I went fishing a couple of weekends ago on a Saturday morning, and we hopped in my old Toyota 4x4, and we drove down this little back road, and then found the little fishing spot that I wanted. And so I turned off the road, and it has rained a lot this year, and so everything is washed out, and if anybody's driven anywhere, there's deep ruts, and so when you get off the driving road, it's like chaos and confusion. It's like, when you're flying in the airplane, a little fasten your seatbelt light comes on, and the pilot, explains we're about to hit turbulence. That's kind of what it was like. We turned off, and all of a sudden we're like, whoosh. We're talking serious turbulence, because the vehicle's like this, and it's like this, and it's kind of like doing this. Right? Because I'm not walking all that way with our fishing gears on. I'm driving us right up. Well, Joseph's over there, and I saw him. He goes, it's in the patrol, we call that the pucker factor. You're going to suction your seat right to you. And I could see it. But the fascinating thing, he never said anything. He never made a sound. He never and when we got done, he just got out of the car, got out of the Toyota, left the seat there. It was great. And he never even said anything till I asked him, "Were you a little worried there?" He goes, "Yeah, a little." But he trusted that his dad knew what he was doing. He trusted that if Dad says we can drive over there, okay. I trust him. Even though he was a little worried, I'm sure he was scared. I mean, I've been in that position as a kid, driving along, and all of a sudden somebody starts driving someplace that I don't think we can do this. Not because we're not allowed, but because I'm really sure this is just not safe. But hey, when you're with somebody you trust, you let them do what they're going to do. And you simply trust that they know what they're doing. Well, Ruth had to trust Boaz that way. And in the same way, the truth is that we have to learn to trust others to know what they're doing. We have to trust. Now, this doesn't mean that we trust everybody. When the Bible teaches us to trust people, it's not a blanket statement of, I'm going to trust everybody completely 100%. It is simply, we need to be able to trust the trustworthy people. And sometimes that does mean we have to take a step out and simply say, you know what, you're supposed to know what you're doing. I'm going to trust that you do. Until I get some indication that you really don't know what you're doing, I'm going to trust. So we extend this trust, and we cannot allow fear and worry, especially fear that is fueled by what we don't know. We can't let that drive our lives. We have to trust other people. See, Ruth could have really distrusted Boaz because she didn't understand all this. She didn't understand how this worked. She had to trust Boaz, who did. Had to allow him to do what he had to do. And the truth of the matter is that when we trust others, we really have to trust that God can work through them. In Isaiah 48:14, God is speaking of Cyrus of Persia when he says, come together all of you and listen. Which of the idols has foretold these things? The Lord's chosen ally will carry out his purpose against Babylon. His arm will be against the Babylonians. See, Cyrus, a pagan king, is called the Lord's chosen ally. See, God had selected Cyrus for a task, for something to do, and Cyrus was going to accomplish it, largely because God was going to work through Cyrus, even if Cyrus had no clue. And so this whole idea of trusting other people is really, we have to trust that God will work through other people to accomplish what needs to be done. And we have to trust that God will work in them and give them the knowledge and give them the skills to do what needs to be done when we don't have that knowledge and skill. And so ultimately, this whole idea of trust boils down to trusting God, which means we do sometimes have to extend that trust to other people to allow God to do what God's going to do and to use whoever he wants to use to do it. So sometimes we got to trust other people to know what they're doing. And then we got to trust that they'll actually do it. See, there's a difference between trusting that they know what to do and trusting that they're actually going to get it done. Boaz shows that he knows what needs to be done. He goes to the city gate of Bethlehem, really more just a small town gate. And that was a common gathering place in ancient Israel. There wasn't like a town square, an open space inside, so a lot of times they would just gather at the gate. That was kind of the place where everybody was going to have to pass through, because the fields are right outside the town, and all the flocks will be out over here somewheres, and so everybody has to go by the gate at some point in time. So he sat down at the gate. He's like, I got to talk to this guy, so I know how to do this. I'm going to sit down. And sure enough, the guy comes along, and then he grabs some witnesses and sits them all down. So he knows how this works. He knows what he's doing. He knows how to accomplish this. But we also see, not only did he know how to do it, he actually did it. You see, he could have gathered everybody together and said, hey, so anybody got any weather predictions? You know, National Weather Service hasn't come along yet, so we kind of have to figure out weather prediction ourselves. What do you think it's going to do? They could have talked grain prices. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff he could have decided to do. And he could have sat there and thought, you know what? You know, for Naomi and Ruth, yeah, me marrying Ruth is a really good plan for them. But you know, I don't know about me. It's kind of costly. This is going to cost a little bit. As a matter of fact, the other guy that was the closer kinsman redeemer actually said, I can't do it because it would put my inheritance in jeopardy. In other words, it's like, yeah, no, taking care of Ruth, and the widow, and then also Happening, you have children with her, and they were going to be the inheritors of so now I got to provide not only for my own firstborn, but I also have to, the firstborn son that she has to get all the firstborn rights as well. And it's like, oh my goodness, I'll go broke. Yeah, I can't. And Boaz could have sat there and thought, I'm not going to do it. You know what, I'm sure this weather would be good for them. It's just too much for me. But he didn't. He didn't. He knew not only what needed to be done, but he did it. He did what he said he was going to do. And we have to trust him sometimes, and sometimes it's a big leap for us to trust that other people are actually going to do what they say they're going to do. The other people are going to do what needs to be done. And part of what makes it so hard to trust others to actually do what needs to be done is that we have seen a lot of people who only do what benefits them. As a matter of fact, we have a society that almost teaches us that look out for number one. And we're afraid that we're going to be betrayed or that we're going to be disappointed in someone. That we're going to be let down. As I was thinking about this, I started thinking about John Wayne's movie, Sands of Iwo Jima. Great movie. Absolutely great movie. And in one part of the movie, there's these three Marines that have gotten themselves kind of, they dug out a little foxhole, and they were pinned down by the Japanese, and the ammo started running out. And so they sent one of the guys back to the beach to pick up some more ammunition. And so he runs back there, and he gets there, and he's grabbing this ammunition, and he looks over, and there's this group of soldiers sitting there drinking coffee. And it's been a long time since he's had a good cup of joe. And so they invite him, hey, you want a cup of coffee? And he sits down and has a cup of coffee. And he stays a while. Now, meanwhile, his other two buddies run out of ammunition. And they get overrun by the Japanese. Well, when he finally gets up and he gets the ammunition back to the foxhole, he finds that they've been killed. You see, he didn't do what he said he was going to do, or at least he didn't do it in a timely fashion. He did actually get the ammo and come back. He took a little detour to a little coffee stop first. You see, we're always afraid that's what's going to happen to us. If we ever have to trust somebody else to do something, it's like, you know what, I think I'd rather just take my chances and do it myself. I would just rather handle this myself because that is what's going to happen to me. And a lot of times that has happened. And that builds in us this inability to trust, but we have to somehow move past this inability to trust and learn that just because we've been burned doesn't mean that we distrust everybody. It simply means that we have to be, sometimes it means we have to be more careful with who we trust. But it's too easy to cross that line and just say, I'm not going to trust anybody. And see, and I understand that. I get that. I struggle with that myself. My wife will tell you. My thing is, I like people, I respect people. I don't trust them. Not a one. Not a one. And so as I'm doing this sermon, I really want you to understand, I have to work this out as well. So I'm not asking you to do something I'm not willing to do myself. I'm telling you, I'm going to have to work on this with everyone else, because this is a struggle for me. Trusting people is rough, but it's true. We have to. We need to. We need to trust that others will do what they need to do. As a matter of fact, Jesus is the greatest example of a trusting person that we have. And the fascinating thing about Jesus is he trusted his disciples. He trusted each and every one of them, even Judas Iscariot. And in John 13, when he washes the disciples' feet, it even says he knew Judas was going to betray him. He knew who it was that was going to betray him. But he still extended a level of trust to Judas, which I always scratch my head. Why? Why? We're told that Judas Iscariot, not only did he betray Jesus, but he was also a thief. He was a thief. He was a known thief. Fascinating thing is, who did Jesus have carrying the money bag for the group? Judas Iscariot. Why? I don't know. But he did. I mean, talk about a mind-blown instance. It's like, you know all of this? Well, yeah, of course I do. Does it bother you? Apparently it didn't bother him enough to stop. Even Judas Iscariot received a certain level of trust from Jesus. And Jesus knew. Now, I'm not saying that we need to trust somebody that we know is going to betray us with something very important. And we don't need to trust them with our lives if we know they're not going to have them. But we do need to learn to extend as much trust as we can to people. And when we're left in a position where we have to trust somebody to do something, we just have to learn to trust. Again, going back to trust that God will work through them to accomplish what needs to be accomplished, and that nothing's going to happen, nothing at all is going to happen aside from God allowing it to happen. And I think that's really the root of trust is God has a purpose and a plan for everything that he allows and everything that he does. And we're not going to understand it all. We just have to trust him. And finally, we have to trust that others are as dedicated and determined as we are. See, Boaz was pursuing this matter quite thoroughly. He sat down, he began the conversation, and at first it looked like the other guy was willing to redeem everything. So Boaz pressed even further. And he kept going until the desired outcome came about. Because I really think by this point he had a lot of respect for Ruth. And she would make a great wife. And he wanted all this to work out to where he could become her husband and the caretaker of her and Naomi and Elimelech's memory and his son's memory and inheritance and all of this. And so he pursued this matter. Now Ruth had to trust he was going to pursue it as determinedly as she would. Otherwise, I think she would have just gone along and said, let me handle this. And she might have sat and watched for a while, but about the time that the other guy was, oh yeah, sure, I'll buy it. Now wait a minute. Let me interfere here. Let me interfere. You know, it's fascinating to me how many times we all think we need to jump in because things look like they're taking a bad turn. It's like, whoops, now I need to step in and straighten this out. And sometimes we can mess it up worse. Sometimes we could really cause some serious damage when we do that. Because sometimes we don't understand as much as we need to. In Ruth's case, if she would have gone along and if she would have interfered, she didn't understand how negotiations worked in this society. She didn't understand what all the laws of passing property and redemption were all about. She didn't even hardly understand the concepts, probably, although maybe she'd been taught some. I don't know. But she could have stepped in a little too early before Boaz was able to play out his entire progress. It's kind of like playing poker, you know. You don't want to give away too much at first. Some people are really good at playing poker. Some people, I like playing poker with them because you know exactly what they got in their hand from the get-go. Playing Texas Hold'em with some of Melissa's family in the past. It's like certain ones I love because it's like, dude, I know what you got. Are you counting cards? I don't have to. You go, ah, when you got a good hand every time. You smile. Don't do that. And you start fuming when it's a bad one. Just like, dude, ever heard of a poker face? See, when you're playing poker, you just want you want to play your cards out, and sometimes you got to play them. Just play it cool. Because you got a plan of how you're going to turn this mess into something usable. Well, it's the same way. Is sometimes we got to just trust that even though it doesn't look good right now, that there is a plan, and it's unfolding the way it needs to. And what's fascinating to me about how determined Boaz was is like I mentioned. This was going to be kind of costly for him. There's going to be some definite financial setbacks that he was going to have to deal with, because number one, they talk about he's going to have to acquire this property, buy it. It says buy it for yourself. In verse 8 is what the other guy told him, buy it. So he's going to have to pay a price for this. But this is where we see how determined he really was, is he was going to pay the price. He was going to pay the price of redemption for Naomi, Ruth, and the family. But not only that, but there was a financial obligation that he was then going to have to all of them from that point forward. And he was determined enough to do it. He was determined enough that he was going to pay whatever price was necessary. See, when we look at the godly example that is presented in the character of Ruth, and we see that there are times that we really do have to acknowledge that there are other people out there who are just as dedicated to our well-being as we are. And they have just as much drive and determination as we have. And as I thought about that, for reasons that are probably pretty obvious, my mind turned to the military. Most members in the military are determined to look out for the welfare of the people of our nation. They're determined. They're driven to watch out for our welfare. And they're so dedicated, they're willing to put their lives in jeopardy to protect the freedoms that we have. There are also other, less obvious individuals that God has put in our lives. Some of them, they don't even have a position that we would consider. They're not necessarily firefighters or EMTs or police officers. They're just the average Joe Blow or Jane Doe around us. But they have a heart for Christ, and because of their heart for Christ, they have a heart for people, and they have a heart for us. And they want to see only the best for us. And indeed, the church is meant to be that for people. We're meant to have that heart for people, and we're meant to be known as Christ's presence to these people, looking out for their best interests. Because God has their best interests at heart. Which brings us back to this realization that though we do need to learn to trust other people, the reality is that the one who is most trustworthy, the one who always knows what to do, who always will do it, and has more dedication and determination than anybody, is Jesus. And Jesus brought about that great hope that was revealed in Jeremiah 29:11 when God said that He has plans for His people that are good. Plans for a future and a hope. You see, God cares greatly for the good of people. And He cares so much that He's willing to send Jesus to pay the penalty for our sins and give us new life. So that, as John 3:16 tells us, all who believe in Him will inherit eternal life. See, the truth is, Jesus is on your side. He's on your side. Hebrews 7:25 says of Him, therefore He, being Jesus, is able also to save forever those who draw near to God through Him, since He always lives to make intercession for them. Okay, the picture there in Hebrews is Jesus is in the throne room of God, standing at His right hand. And He's interceding for us, and that means He's appealing on our behalf to God the Father. He's on your side. You ever wonder what Jesus is doing up in heaven? What's He been doing ever since He went back to heaven after His resurrection? Why did He even go back to heaven? Why didn't He just stay here forever and wander amongst us? It's because He's still working. And Hebrews tells us what He's doing. He's interceding. He's appealing to God on our behalf. He's looking out for our best interests in the throne room of heaven. Oh, I tell you what, I can't think of a better advocate that I'd rather have. Nobody's going to do any better. And I can't think of anybody I'd rather have in my corner, especially on the day of judgment, when I have to stand before God and give an account for my entire life. I can't think of anybody I would rather have standing by my side, interceding on my behalf, because there's a lot I'm going to have to answer for. There's a lot I've said, done, thought, stuff that God's going to say, what about this? I praise Him that His Son's going to be standing right next to Him. Because I don't think I'm going to have anything to say. I'm not going to be able to. I imagine it's going to be a pretty rough time. But I have an advocate who's going to be there. And He's available to anyone who will trust Him. The long and the short of it is this: you can trust Him. And that's a fact. Let's pray. Father in heaven, as we come to the close of the book of Ruth, we want to thank You for the things that You've taught us, things that we see in the life of Ruth, and especially the character of Ruth. We thank You, Father, that through her life and example, there are things that we can learn about ourselves, about how we're supposed to live, and things that we learn about You. And Father, we come to this realization that we do need to learn how to trust, especially You. We need to trust You. And so I thank You, Father, that You've given us every reason to trust You, that You've proven Yourself over and over and over again. And I thank You that You are a God that we can trust. Not just in our minds, and not just in our ideas about you, but we can truly, honestly, genuinely put our trust in you and know that you're working for our good. Not just for our good, but for the good of all those around us as well. And so I pray, Father, that you would put that heart for people around us into us as well. I pray, Lord, that we would begin to look out for the best interests of the people that are part of our lives, and the people that we encounter, the people that we come across in our day-to-day activities. And I pray, Lord, that we would begin to have that same compassion for them that you do, and that we would begin to work for their best interests. And I pray, Father, that not only would we learn to trust, but I pray, Lord, that we would be found to be trustworthy people ourselves. So conform us into the image of Christ, I pray. And I pray it in the name of Jesus himself.